seems to me the bigger thing is that, if by funding, if we were funding this at a 7.5% discount rate,
Yeah.
what would our liability be?
I can tell you, I can give you a pretty good estimate on that. It's 7%. Your liability would come down to $23 million, so it's 7.5, probably about 21.5, 22.
So not quite cut it in half, but
Yeah, down by about 30, 40%.
we're getting very close to that. So actually, you end up, right? You end up funding a lot less over time.
Correct, and that's what I was in a meeting last night.
This is really this is the conundrum for us, right? I mean, we've looked at every avenue we can to try to reduce our liability, and we've looked at reducing benefits and cutting employees, and making sure everybody's signed up for Medicare, and every means that we can to try to reduce our expenses. But the one thing that I think we need to get to and haven't got to is a funding plan that gets us at least to a level where we can take advantage of this significantly better discount rate that has us paying much less over time.
Well, as you just described, it's a comment I made last night to folks is, by virtue of funding, you don't have to fund as much, i.e., if you fund money, now your liability is $23 million instead of $36 million. If you can't afford to fund anything, you got to come up with $36 million. If you can't afford to fund it, you got to come up with 23. So it's a certain circularity in that, which I fully acknowledge. But that's, again, the idea here is they're trying to reward better behavior, for lack of a better way of saying it. And again, if you look at the GASB 68 guidelines that have recently come out on pension, it's really the same kind of a thing. They want to see benefits that they can show are funded over time. We get to use the higher discount rate. Benefits that are unfunded, we have to use the 20-year municipal bond index. So that's really comes down to, again, it's your discount rate is based on your behavior. And whether that's good or bad behavior is in the eye of the beholder, but they're...
So what would we have to do, not wanting to be really good on really good behavior, but just kind of barely passable D-plus behavior, what would we need to do to be able to qualify for a better discount rate?
Honestly, if you guys were putting up, in the, I'd say anywhere between $400,000 to $500,000 a year, and maybe increasing that at 2.5% to 3% a year, that would certainly, I think you could certainly talk to your auditors, who obviously we talk to all the time. I think we could probably certainly get them in the, probably the high sixes, if not 7. And it's dependent on how you decide to invest the money too. If you say we're going to take all the money and put it in treasury bills, then no, we can't get that, because the discount rate is based on how you invest the money.
Yeah. So
like, for example, a town I was working with yesterday, they have a 35-65 funding policy. They put 35% in fixed income. 65% in fixed income, 35% in equities. That equates to about a 6.2% discount rate. If you told me you were going to be at 60-40, 50-50, different ways get you different places. That just really depends on how you're going to invest the money.
But we certainly faced this issue just recently with the FEFI's funding. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we have, $25 million that is being managed now for the benefit of the school system in a trust fund, and the group is doing a fantastic job of managing it and doing just what you're saying, really putting a good strategy together for how you invest it. But it seems like we should be taking, a leaf from that plant to sort of say this is how we should approach this issue. And $400,000 to $500,000, I think, is actually, it's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
It's not. We're coming up with several $100,000 in past years.
If you look at, our plan assets now are $1.3 million, I think, which we've accumulated over the last 3 years, pretty much. So I guess if looking at that, you wonder why we didn't qualify for a higher discount rate, given what we've done thus far.
Because you really don't have a funding policy.
Right.
Okay.
You're just throwing money in ad hoc.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you guys adopted formally a funding policy that says we're putting in $400,000 a year and we're going to increase it at 2.5% a year until we achieve full funding, that's a funding policy. And you can go to your Powers and Sullivan and say, guys, here's our policy. Here's how we're taking down the liability. That shows us to be now at funding 70% of the liability. So I want to use 70% of the higher discount rate, 30% of the lower one, and here's where our blended rate of 6.28 or whatever the number happens to be. We could certainly do that, but that requires a funding policy.
And when you wrote to the S&P, what was the funding policy of that town and what mechanism?
Sure. Their funding policy is they adopted a 30-year funding schedule that said basically they're going to put in $290,000 a year for the next 30 years. So in their case, they have a funding schedule. It's a flat dollar in their case. So it's obviously, it gets easier as time goes along because $290,000 30 years from now is worth a lot less than today. But they have that money going in every year. And, we showed S&P that after 30 years, assets and liabilities are effectively equal. And S&P definitely liked the fact that they had, committed to that schedule. And, don't get me wrong. S&P or Fitch or Moody's isn't going to upgrade you solely because of what you did on OPEB. Right. I mean, you have a lot of other things going on. But, that was one element of the thing. I'm not trying to say that, I'm the magic man and I did this one thing and I got them 2 rating points. I mean, that's not it. They do a lot of things. But this was certainly an element of the equation.
That was Mattapoisett, the 290?
Yes.
And do you know how they compare as a community, population, tax base, or any of that sort of stuff?
I don't know that kind of stuff. I know, from what I understand, I would be considered more on the wealthier community. They're down on the water, and they definitely have really nice houses. So I mean,
bigger houses.
So they're definitely doing all right. But I couldn't speak to their tax base.
Michael?
Yes, I have 2 questions. One is to pursue the circularity question a little more. So if we were to the town were to establish a policy that would satisfy our liability over time, such as Mattapoisett has done, and resulting then in a higher discount rate so that the total liability the projected liability would be less, wouldn't that stream of payments then that we had committed to exceed what the liability would then be projected to be?
No, because the stream of payments that you calculate is based on that lower liability. It goes back to my circularity argument, is that we don't calculate the stream of payments to fund it based on the 4% number. We calculate the stream of payments to fund it at the 6.5 or the 7 or the 7.5 number.
Got it. Okay. All right. So secondly, pursuing more the value of a higher or better bond rating.
Yep.
Can you tell us just a little more about the change in the bond rating and the resultant change in cost of funds that the town had?
That I really couldn't tell you because I don't really work in that space in terms of the bond rating world. I just know that they were able to get a 2-point bump in it, which obviously does help. Now, does that, from what I understand, that's probably in the neighborhood of like 20 basis points.
Uh-huh.
It's not like you get a 2% decrease in your cost of borrowing.
Okay.
I understand to be around 20 basis points, but I'm not going to say that I'm a bond expert by any means. That's not municipal finances. Bond finance is not where I cut my teeth, so I don't want to.
It's tangible, but not huge. It
depends on how much money you're looking to borrow. Is the short answer.
Yeah.
You said we're looking to borrow $100 million. Okay, fine. That's saving me $200,000-300,000 a year.
Right.
If you say we're looking to borrow $5 million, yeah, it's probably not really worth your time.
Right. Well, we do have some pending projects, but we'll play with that.
Yeah, and the other thing I tell folks is I had this conversation last night with a group is, before you even adopt a funding plan of $400,000, whatever the number happens to be, I'm sure you folks, S&P and the gang, come in here every so often and talk to you folks and talk about your accounting policies and everything you do. Have a conversation with them. Find out what makes them tick. What's going to make them happy? Is the magic number 500? Is the magic number 200? Is it 800? What is it that will work for you guys, as opposed to, just go out and adopt a plan blindly, and then they go, well, gee, we were looking for something else. Ask the question. I mean, the questions are free. There's no harm in asking. And 5 minutes up front will save you a lot of grief later.
And I think it has to be done in the context of other reserves and other expenditure programs as well. It's not just solely looking at OPEB.
Oh, absolutely. And that's my whole point is, if $500,000 in a stabilization reserve, $500,000 in OPEB are exactly the same. Nationwide, medical expenses have been compared